So what I want to start with is Numbers 30, which is truly a chapter almost no one ever reads. Why would anyone read this chapter? The topic of the chapter is vows, right? When a man makes a vow to the Lord or swears an oath to bind himself by a pledge, he shall not break his word. He shall do according to all that proceeds out of his mouth. A basic rule. If you make a vow and you invoke God's name, you're bound by it. I think this is relatively recognizable to us even today, right? So help me God in court is doing basically the same thing. The idea here is that God's name is powerful. Whatever you say, you now must do because God's name has attached to your vow. Okay, so that's the basic law. Like, how much more complicated could it possibly be? Like, is this a 2-verse chapter? For men, it is no more complicated than that. That is literally all you have to know. Did I say it? Did I invoke God's name? I better do it. That's the whole thing. For women, though, and that's the entire rest of the chapter. So we start with the woman who is young, but she's still living in her father's house, and she makes a vow, and her father hears about the vow. And if he's like, okay, and doesn't say anything, then it all stands. But if he expresses disapproval, right, when he hears of it, then her vow is annulled. He annuls her vows. No reasons are necessary. There are no restrictions on the types of vows he can annul or how much of it or how many of them. He simply says no, and she is no longer bound by her vows. Now, you might say, well, I have kids and they say stupid stuff all the time. And of course it's sensible for a father to be able to cancel his children's vows. They're children. And that's true. But it's not what this says. Fathers are not canceling their children's vows in this law. They are canceling only their daughters' vows. Daughters are thereby distinguished from sons. Now, I do think that it's safe to say that we are not actually talking about like children here, like little kids. The daughter in question here, I think, is old enough to be married, as we'll see in a moment. But like actually, that makes it worse. Here is a young woman old enough to be married, but who does not control her own words, her own will. The next scenario in this law is that her father does let her vow stand, right? So she's taken a vow in her father's house. He hasn't said anything to her. Her vow stands, but then she gets married and her vow is still in force. And lo and behold, now her husband can cancel her vow, even though her father had allowed it. She has, in effect, changed hands from one dominant male to another. Though she has indeed changed houses, right? She's left the house of her childhood and she's gone on to the house of her adult life. She's changed houses, but she hasn't changed her status at all, really. She remains under the authority of a man. And this continues to be the case, of course, not just when she first gets married, but as long as she's married. If she takes another vow, like after she's changed households, her husband has the same power that her father did when she lived with him. The text is pretty straightforward about this. Any vow or any binding oath to deny herself, her husband may allow to stand or her husband may nullify. And if there was any doubt at all that all of this has to do with male control over their own households, men's households, we have in the middle of the chapter the exception to these rules about vows. The women for whom a vow is binding like that of a man are those who are divorced or widowed. Right? They alone have the same authority as men, at least in this regard. Right? There is simply no man in their lives to tell them no. So they have some agency in a way that they're married and beparented friends may not, but they're also, as widows and divorcees, extraordinarily socially vulnerable. Right? It's really clear from the rest of the Bible that being divorced and being widowed are not states any woman wanted to live in, right? Even if they suddenly had like authority over their own vows. So, I mean, what I want to suggest is that this law, this whole chapter is about vows, right? That's the like nominal topic of the thing, but the law is really about male authority over women. Women who live in a household with a man are always under his control. They lack agency. And I would say remarkably, given what the Bible is, they lack agency even in their own devotion to God. A vow is the strongest possible speech. If a man can override a woman's speech, even when it's a vow invoking God's name, you can only imagine what kinds of power men exerted over like regular women's speech.